Cairo International Airport, Egypt, March 14, 1982, 6:47 a.m. A Boeing 707 in the familiar colors of Mediterranean Air Charter, a small European charter outfit that supposedly links North Africa with cities around the Mediterranean, rolls off the runway and heads toward a quiet parking spot far from the main terminal. The jet carries a Swiss registration. Its pilots and cabin crew speak English, though the mix of accents makes it clear they come from different parts of Europe. The manifest shows 37 travelers who began their trip in Athens and are now entering Cairo before continuing on to a petroleum industry meeting in Alexandria. To Egyptian customs officers who board the aircraft, nothing seems out of place. The carrier presents clean paperwork. The insurance documents check out. Arrival notices were filed on time. The passengers look exactly like the specialists they claim to be: petroleum engineers, geological analysts, equipment representatives, each with badges and letters from companies that appear legitimate. Their bags hold predictable items: thick technical books, catalogs of drilling machinery, stacks of business cards for real firms employing people whose names match the passports being examined. The whole scene gives off the calm, ordinary rhythm of a routine charter arrival. What the Egyptian officials cannot see, what gives them no reason to pause, is the truth hidden behind the calm surface. Mediterranean Air Charter is not a real airline. It has no history, no offices open to the public, no staff beyond a carefully selected handful. The Boeing 707 belongs to a shell company set up in Liechtenstein, a structure designed to hide its true owner. The pilots and crew are not civilian flyers at all, but officers working under deep cover for Israeli intelligence. And the 37 passengers moving down the steps are Mossad operatives, military intelligence officers, and technical teams whose assignment has nothing to do with oil or geology. Their mission will play out quietly over the next 72 hours across Cairo, Alexandria, and the Sinai Peninsula. This is the account of how Mossad built an entire airline as a disguise, more than a made-up business name, more than a rented office. They created a working aviation operation with functioning aircraft, scheduled routes, crew rotations, and enough believable detail to let Israeli agents travel through countries still officially at war with Israel. Commercial aviation became the ideal mask, letting them move personnel, crates, and sensitive gear that could never pass through normal checkpoints. Tel Aviv, Israel, November 1980, Mossad headquarters. The idea behind this elaborate cover started during a meeting in a plain conference room where senior officers had gathered to confront a problem that had dragged on for years.
Israeli intelligence needed a way to place agents throughout the Middle East and North Africa without relying on Israeli passports, El Al flights, or anything that hinted at an Israeli connection. Travel restrictions, watch lists, and close scrutiny made standard routes unusable. "We need mobility," said David Kimchi, deputy director of Mossad's Operations Division. He spoke plainly to the officers whose permission he needed for the plan he was shaping. He pointed out that operations in Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, even states that were technically calm toward Israel, were all limited by one constant issue: visibility. Any hint of Israeli origin triggered suspicion, and suspicion shut down missions before they even began. The room sat quiet for a moment as the officers absorbed the scale of what he was implying. To move freely, they needed something no one would question, something that slipped through borders every day, something no one would imagine Mossad would dare to build from scratch. "We could invent new identities and put together convincing papers. We could even set up cover jobs that looked normal from the outside, But the core problem stayed the same. Our people still had to move in and out of foreign states in a way that left no trail hostile services could follow. Old methods helped only so much. A lone officer slipping through on a forged passport worked for small jobs, but not for moving whole teams needed for larger and longer missions. Bringing in intermediaries from third countries gave us another path, but it weakened security and cut down our control. Crossing borders on foot or coming in by sea was fine for one-off targets, but it never gave the steady access that long intelligence work demanded. Kimchi pushed a different idea. Instead of relying only on forged documents for commercial flights, he suggested owning the entire means of travel. Not just a fake identity, but a whole charter airline that looked 100% real, flew normal routes, and dealt openly with aviation regulators across the region. An airline that, behind the scenes, belonged entirely to Israeli intelligence. It sounded bold and costly. A working airline needed real aircraft, trained crews, maintenance teams, contracts with airports and ground handlers, insurance, approvals from several aviation authorities, and tight security to keep anyone from learning that this supposed independent European charter outfit was actually a cover operation. One officer pointed out that the Americans had run something similar with Air America in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam years. The CIA had controlled an airline that handled commercial and military jobs while shielding its covert work. It stayed hidden for a long time before its ties became too clear. Air America failed in the end because it grew too visible and too tied to American aims. Kimchi pushed back. This plan was not a copy. Mediterranean Air Charter would operate as a real business.
He would carry paying passengers, run normal charter flights, bring in enough revenue to stand on its own. Intelligence tasks would make up only a small slice of flights, mixed into ordinary operations so completely that no one would notice. The proposal moved up the chain to Prime Minister Menachem Begin. An operation this large and sensitive needed his sign-off. Begin agreed, but added one hard rule. The airline had to be fully deniable. If anyone uncovered the truth, Israel would claim no link, point to the company as private enterprise, and detach itself from any political or legal fallout. That was how Operation Skybridge began. It became the code name for building and running an airline that would quietly move Israeli intelligence teams around the Middle East for the next 10 years. And to make the whole thing believable, they had to start from pieces that looked completely legitimate. Mossad had no way to pass off Israeli planes as something else by slapping on new colors and hoping no one looked closely. Aviation rules are strict everywhere. Every plane carries a registration that links straight to real ownership records. Every airline must hold valid operating papers from civil aviation officials. And any flight that crosses a border has to file its passenger and cargo details with both the country it leaves and the one it enters. So, the work started in Switzerland. The country's banking secrecy and tight privacy rules made it easy to set up companies that looked normal on paper while hiding who controlled them behind several layers of holding firms and paid stand-ins. Mediterranean Air Charter SA appeared in Geneva in January 1981. On paper, it was a simple charter outfit meant to serve routes across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its ownership chain ran from a Liechtenstein trust to an investment fund in Cyprus and then to a holding structure in Luxembourg. Each step added another veil, and anyone trying to trace the real decision-makers would hit legal walls unless they had access to protected Swiss documents. The official owners were older European aviation professionals who had already left the industry. Mossad approached them through pitches that looked like ordinary business proposals. They were promised modest fees and almost no day-to-day work. All they had to do was let the company use their names and backgrounds. They believed they were joining a small charter startup, nothing more. After building the corporate shell, the next task was getting planes. The team focused on used Boeing 707s that European airlines were phasing out. Over roughly 18 months, Mediterranean Air Charter bought 3 of them. Each one was placed on the Swiss registry, put through heavy maintenance to bring it up to full commercial standards, and repainted with a clean but forgettable look. Blue and white tones, simple Mediterranean graphics, the kind of design many small carriers used so no one would pay extra attention. The aircraft were not cheap. Each cost around $3 million, and bringing them into working condition added roughly $1 million more per plane. Still, the money made sense for what the planes allowed. They could move groups of 30 or 40 people, along with gear and supplies, into places where sending individuals alone would stand out or fail outright. The planes gave Mossad a legal, structured way to insert whole teams under the cover of normal commercial traffic. But the cover only worked because the airline actually operated. Mediterranean Air Charter flew real customers. It signed contracts with European tour groups that needed seasonal flights to beach towns in North Africa. It worked with oil firms that shuttled crews to sites in Libya and Egypt. It moved cargo and staff for aid agencies working in Sudan and Somalia. These flights took place week after week. That steady activity built a track record. The money the company earned was real, not invented. Clients came back when the service ran on time and without trouble. Word spread to other charter buyers who needed reliable operators. By the time the network was fully in place, the airline looked like any other modest charter outfit in the region: busy, competent, and unremarkable, which was exactly what the operation needed. The Mossad officer who oversaw the airline's work liked to say that the most effective cover is the kind that does not look like cover at all. If Mediterranean Air Charter appeared in the air only when intelligence tasks came up, the pattern would stand out fast. So the airline kept up more than 200 regular commercial flights every year, and inside that stream hid maybe 15 to 20 missions. This gave the company a real operating record that looked clean to anyone who checked. Investigators would see exactly what the paperwork described: an airline doing normal business. The first run, the opening intelligence job tied to Mediterranean Air Charter, took place in August 1981. It was a flight from Geneva to Khartoum, Sudan. On paper, it carried agricultural advisors working on a United Nations development effort. In truth, it moved an MSAD team sent to build early networks for what later became Operation Moses, the secret evacuation route for Ethiopian Jews through Sudan. That early mission showed how useful an airline could be as cover, but it also exposed the strain behind the idea. The upside was clear. The team entered Sudan legally with documents that survived every customs check. Their gear passed as technical equipment for farming projects, not as communications tools or intelligence hardware. They could travel around Sudan without drawing attention. Their supposed jobs gave them believable reasons to visit remote areas where Ethiopian refugees were gathering.
They blended in with the many aid workers moving through the country. But the trip also showed the cracks. Sudanese intelligence had enough skill to watch foreign visitors closely, even those with real UN badges. The operatives had to keep up the Agricultural Consultant Act every day, even when they were running intelligence tasks. They had to attend real UN briefings, write reports on development issues, and stay in touch with actual UN staff who assumed they were long-term colleagues. After the mission, the team leader said the cover could not be treated like a costume. They had to live it all the time. That meant doing the work they claimed to do, which drained hours and attention that would otherwise go to the mission. The approach was safer than classic covert methods, but it demanded more from the people in the field, because real authenticity took real effort. This shaped how Mediterranean Air Charter would be used later. Intelligence planners shifted toward missions that drew strength from legitimate commercial activity. They stopped building covers out of thin air. Operatives received training in the civilian roles they would claim. Missions stretched across months or even years instead of quick hits that risked exposing the airline's true purpose. These changes guided the next major step, the Cairo operation in March 1982. Mediterranean Air's charter had built up enough flight history and a steady name in the region to try work that was far bolder than anything it had handled before. The Cairo job was one of those steps. It meant flying Israeli intelligence officers into Egypt, a country that was technically at peace with Israel after the 1979 Camp David Accords, yet still a place where any hint of Israeli intelligence activity could set off trouble on every political level. The goal was simple to state, but hard to carry out. Create networks that could watch how the Egyptian military was modernizing, follow Soviet weapons entering the country, and figure out whether Egypt's peace with Israel was a real shift in strategy or only a temporary break in a fight that many feared would return. For Israel, this information shaped almost every major defense choice. Knowing what the Egyptian military could do, and what its commanders planned to do, affected everything from border readiness to long-term investment in new weapons. But sending Mossad officers into Cairo was a gamble with serious stakes. Egyptian intelligence, though willing to cooperate with Israel on issues like terrorism, never relaxed its counterintelligence work. Its officers looked hard for any sign of Israeli espionage. Many Egyptian military officers still carried resentment from wars they had lost, which made real trust nearly impossible even after diplomatic ties were restored. And much of the Egyptian public viewed Israel with open hostility. So any exposure of an Israeli intelligence effort would have created a political firestorm.
Mediterranean Air's charter became the workaround. A petroleum conference provided a clean reason for the team to enter the country. The plane's Swiss registration kept any Israeli link out of sight. The operatives carried European passports and job records that held up under scrutiny, making them look like ordinary technical specialists whose work simply took them to Cairo from time to time. When the 37 passengers stepped off the aircraft that March morning, they broke into small groups and moved quietly through Cairo and Alexandria. They checked into hotels, sat through conference talks, and met with Egyptian petroleum officials who never suspected they were speaking with intelligence officers. While doing so, they collected details on Egypt's military-industrial network, the presence of Soviet advisors, and the real strength behind Egypt's promises under the peace agreements that Israeli leaders still viewed with doubt. Between 1982 and 1984, Mediterranean Air's charter grew far beyond its early role. What had started as a trial run for moving intelligence personnel and sensitive cargo slowly turned into a broad system that let Mossad function in places where an Israeli footprint would have been impossible or instantly exposed. The airline ran flights into Yemen, officially flying in humanitarian aid. Hidden in those shipments were tools for tracking Soviet advisors supporting the Marxist leadership in South Yemen.
It also sent flights into Jordan, carrying men who looked like regular businessmen, but were actually officers from Israeli military intelligence. They visited Palestinian refugee camps, gathered impressions on local conditions, and kept an eye on Syrian forces near the Golden Heights. The airline also reached Sudan, Morocco, and Tunisia, places where relations with Israel ranged from cold to openly hostile. Yet a charter plane from a European carrier drew almost no special attention. The pattern stayed the same across all these missions. Real commercial deals acted as the shield. Actual paying customers sat beside undercover personnel, helping the whole setup look natural. Money from honest business kept the books clean and created a steady operational history, making Mediterranean Air Charter match exactly what its files claimed it was. As the airline grew, arguments inside Mossad sharpened. Some senior officers warned that every new mission raised the odds of something going wrong. With each flight, they said, you were taking another chance, and even a strong cover could fail if pushed too often. Others pushed back, insisting that the more the airline worked like a normal business, the safer the hidden work became.
More commercial activity meant more places to blend in and more reasons for flights to move in and out without drawing eyes. They settled on a middle path. Mediterranean air charter would keep widening its commercial reach, but covert missions had to stay below 1/10 of all flights in any quarter. The rule annoyed planners who wanted to use the costly aircraft as much as possible, yet it kept the disguise solid, which mattered more than raw output. Even with these limits, a close call arrived. The near disaster unfolded in Libya in September 1983 during what was supposed to be a simple charter job. The task was to move Italian oil workers from Tripoli out to their company's desert site, a straightforward route the airline had flown before. This time, though, the mission almost exposed everything. Among the passengers on that Mediterranean air charter were 3 Mossad operatives. Their real task was to place hidden monitoring gear around Libyan military sites where Soviet advisors were training Gaddafi's units on advanced weapons. The plan was supposed to be quick and quiet, but it fell apart before they even got close. Libyan intelligence, already alerted by Soviet officers who had seen odd European commercial activity near restricted zones, flagged the flight for extra checks long before it touched Libyan airspace. When the plane landed in Tripoli, local security staff carried out a sudden inspection that looked nothing like routine customs work. They opened luggage piece by piece and used scanners meant to pick up traces of electronics, transmitters, or anything that suggested covert communications gear. 2 of the 3 operatives had nothing that raised questions.
Their covers were solid, their documents looked ordinary, and their equipment matched what a pair of geological surveyors might carry. Their cameras and field tools were normal commercial items, and nothing in their bags pinged on the inspector's devices. The 3rd operative did not get the same luck. His equipment, built to resemble seismic sensors used in standard geological surveys, carried internal components tuned for monitoring military communications and tracking vehicle movements. When Libyan inspectors passed their detection gear over his luggage, the readings didn't match what the declared contents should have shown. The lead officer, speaking calm English as if the matter was already settled, told him these were restricted items and that he would need to come with them for questioning about why he was trying to bring surveillance hardware into Libya without clearance. The operative stuck to his cover. As a supposed Danish employee of a European geological firm, he kept his voice steady and explained that the devices were seismic tools for petroleum exploration. They registered ground vibrations and helped map underground layers. He pointed out that the customs forms allowed geological instruments for oil industry work, and he claimed these items fit that category. The explanation wasn't false. The devices could measure real seismic activity, but the Libyans saw through it. Their suspicion only grew, and the situation shifted from a customs issue to an intelligence case. He was moved to a separate facility where the tone changed fast. The questions grew sharper, the pressure heavier. The threat of long detention or something worse hung over every exchange. Back in Tel Aviv, the crisis set off emergency procedures. Mediterranean air charter couldn't step in without blowing its cover. No normal airline sends lawyers or applies diplomatic heat for one detained traveler, unless that traveler is far more important than the paperwork claims. But they couldn't abandon him either. Leaving him in Libyan hands risked a breakdown under interrogation, and that could expose the airline's real role and everything tied to it. With direct action off the table, the rescue effort had to move through quiet intermediaries, people and channels that never appeared on any official record. The European geological firm listed as the operative's employer was in fact a Mossad shell with real business activity on the side. It lodged formal complaints through Denmark's foreign ministry, framing the arrest as routine harassment of foreign staff working in Libya's oil industry. Denmark, which depended on access to Libyan fields and wanted no political fight, pushed Tripoli to either present real charges or let the man go. After a bit more than 11 days of questioning that the operative later described as mentally grinding but not physically abusive, Libya released him and ordered him out of the country for good.
The outcome let each side claim it had acted properly. Libya could show it took possible spying seriously, Denmark got its citizen back without escalation, and the geological company kept its business ties without admitting any hidden role. Still, the scare showed how exposed Mediterranean air charter really was. The airline's cover survived the moment. Libyan services didn't tie the detained passenger to a wider mission and didn't spot the airline as an intelligence platform. But the incident made it clear that even when the larger system stayed protected, small pressure points could still risk people on the ground. Mossad tightened its rules right after. Operatives would only carry tools when there was no alternative. Surveillance devices would move through normal shipping channels rather than in someone's luggage. And missions into states with strong counterintelligence systems would be reduced to lower the chance of repeated exposure. Operation Moses marked the peak of Mediterranean air charter's usefulness. From November 1984 through January 1985, the airline became a key link in a hidden airlift that moved roughly 8,000 Ethiopian Jews out of refugee camps in Sudan and onto Israel. For years, Ethiopian Jews had been running from drought, hunger, and political pressure, ending up in Sudanese camps where life was harsh and outside help was thin. Sudan, an Arab Muslim state formerly hostile to Israel, couldn't openly help them leave for Israel without risking trouble with the Arab League and facing anger at home. Even so, Sudan's leadership, dealing with its own internal strain, was ready to allow the departures if they happened quietly enough to deny direct involvement. The workaround was a covert series of flights using aircraft that looked like ordinary charter services, masking an operation built to move people who had no legal path out. Mediterranean Air Charter, working alongside Trans-European Airways, which also had its own links to intelligence circles, spent roughly 2 months running dozens of flights that looked like routine charter runs. On paper, they were moving vacationers from familiar European beach spots back to Switzerland and Belgium. In reality, the planes often left with no one on board and returned carrying Ethiopian refugees moved from camps in Sudan to hidden departure points. The whole setup demanded tight coordination and a level of planning that most people involved in normal charter work never saw. Mossad teams using NGO roles handled the quiet movement of families from camps to isolated strips far from major towns. Sudan officials were paid to look the other way when buses rolled out after dark and when aircraft lit up runways that were officially closed for repairs. European aviation regulators accepted small inconsistencies in schedules and paperwork, figuring them to be typical charter quirks instead of signs of an intelligence network moving people under the radar.
Mediterranean Air Charter flew out of Sudan only at night. Passenger lists always mentioned European tourists heading home from Red Sea holidays. The people actually boarding were Ethiopian Jewish families who had walked for hundreds of kilometers through harsh desert routes just to reach pickup zones. Once the aircraft reached Europe, the passengers were guided through Israeli immigration setups that pretended to be normal airline service desks. After that, separate channels moved them onward to Israel without drawing attention. Across roughly 8 weeks, close to 8,000 people were taken out this way, turning the effort into the biggest covert airlift Israeli intelligence had ever managed. It worked because the cover looked ordinary. Most ground crews, airport staff, and even many inside the airlines believed they were dealing with a regular charter company whose odd routings and late-night operations were just part of the job. The mission came undone only after leaks hit the press, stirring the exact diplomatic trouble Sudan leaders had tried to avoid. The airlift shut down before everyone could be moved, yet Mediterranean Air Charter had already done something older covert methods never could: shift thousands across borders under the protection and routine of a functioning airline. The unraveling of Mediterranean Air Charter did not start with its own flights.
The pressure began when unrelated disclosures exposed how Israeli intelligence had long used commercial aviation as cover. In February 2015, South African intelligence files appeared in the media, showing that LL, Israel's national carrier, had been used in Africa for Mossad work. Flight crews had been turned into assets. Aircraft had carried surveillance gear, and airline staff had supported missions far outside standard aviation practice. Once that became public, investigators started checking other airlines with Israeli ties or unusual operating habits, and the net widened quickly. Mediterranean air charter, wound down in the late 1980s, drew fresh attention long after it disappeared. Aviation regulators in the countries where it once flew started digging through old filings and operational logs, trying to spot anything that looked more like intelligence work than routine commercial aviation. As they pieced things together, the picture they got matched long-standing suspicions, though nothing they uncovered crossed the line into absolute proof. They saw odd flight patterns that didn't match market demand, passenger manifests filled with people whose backgrounds were almost impossible to confirm, financial trails that passed through the same Swiss channels known to support intelligence funding, and operational choices that only made sense if the airline had been serving purposes beyond moving travelers from one place to another. Still, solid evidence stayed out of reach. Mediterranean air charter had been built from the start to survive this kind of scrutiny. Its roots were real, its crews were trained professionals, its transactions were documented, and the company's structure was layered enough that figuring out who actually controlled it remained close to impossible, even years after the business had officially ended. The people who flew under its umbrella carried covers strong enough to withstand verification checks, and the missions tied to the airline were compartmented so tightly that no single operative could reveal the full scope of the effort, even under pressure or by accident. By design, the truth stayed scattered and hard to piece together. The story of Mediterranean air charter is still partly locked away. Israeli intelligence has never recognized the airline's role or admitted any connection to it, keeping things in a gray zone where informed guesses can thrive, but firm conclusions cannot. The ambiguity itself works as a shield. It lets the idea of the operation be acknowledged indirectly while keeping the details off the record. Even so, the lessons drawn from the airline have shaped how intelligence services think about cover, logistics, and long-term infrastructure. The airline showed that the strongest cover isn't a flimsy front or a shallow alias. It is a real business that does real work while quietly supporting a hidden agenda. Building something like that demands heavy resources and patience, but it creates tools no basic tradecraft can match. It also highlighted a hard limit. The longer such an operation runs, the more small risks accumulate, and sooner or later, exposure becomes almost certain. Agencies today still lean on commercial entities for operational purposes. Some technology firms build genuine software while offering access points that intelligence teams can use. Security companies protect clients while gathering information in parallel. Humanitarian organizations deliver actual aid, but observe conditions in places where formal access is blocked. The tools shift with technology and politics, but the underlying idea stays the same. The best cover is a real enterprise that stands on its own, one that does what it claims to do while quietly enabling something else behind the scenes. For operatives who carried out intelligence work on Mediterranean air charters flights, the whole setup felt strange in a steady, grinding way. They were running espionage tasks while sitting in ordinary commercial seats, surrounded by regular travelers who had no idea that someone next to them was on a mission. The cover identities demanded real effort, not just surface lines. They had to do the jobs they claimed, hold conversations that matched their assumed roles, and gather information without breaking the rhythm of normal life around them. Day after day, they lived in that odd split where every word and gesture served two purposes at once.
You acted as yourself, but also as the version you needed others to see. Over time, the boundary between those selves got thin. One former operative described this in later testimony, speaking carefully to avoid anything still protected by classification rules. He said that you do not fake being a petroleum consultant. You actually learn petroleum consulting deeply enough to talk about it with people who have spent their whole careers in the field. To reach that point, you commit hundreds of hours to studying topics that have nothing to do with your true assignment, but everything to do with keeping your cover intact. The method works because it looks and feels real. But the trade-off is heavy. You start questioning which of your habits and opinions belong to you and which ones you built for the role. After long enough, the two versions overlap so much that pulling them apart becomes hard. This psychological wear, the slow, unsteady blurring of a person's anchor points, barely appears in official intelligence accounts. Those records talk about operations completed, networks infiltrated, and missions judged successful. They rarely talk about what it costs the people doing the work. Yet for Mediterranean air charters operatives, that cost sat at the center of the job. The airline gave them reach into places where any open Israeli presence would have been impossible. It allowed them to move through regions that would have flagged a traditional intelligence team immediately. It let them handle tasks that regular field officers could not attempt. And it proved again that the airspace above any region is not simply empty sky, but another operating environment, one where civilian systems can be turned toward strategic goals when needed. Somewhere inside Israeli intelligence archives, there is a file that lays out the full story: the flights taken, the missions carried out, the intelligence bundles delivered, the people extracted under pressure, and the results measured afterward. That file sits behind classifications designed to keep it locked away for many decades, maybe forever. Still, its presence signals the strange dual nature of Mediterranean air charters. On one side, it was a functioning commercial airline with documents, schedules, and passengers. On the other, it was a constructed instrument built for strategic intent, shaped to meet goals that had nothing to do with moving tourists from one city to another. The truth of it depends on which measure of reality you choose to use.